This moment is exactly what it looks like. Two ancient beasts who know each other, in the middle of a war, taking a moment together. It's among the gentlest moments this show has put on screen in 3 seasons, and it happened between two creatures who cannot speak. I'm not here to tell you that you got it wrong. I'm here to tell you that there's so much more to it. Because in the entire recorded history of this world, every dynasty, every kingdom, every book the Maesters ever wrote, Vermithor and Silverwing are not just the only dragons that have ever tolerated each other, they are the only two that ever belonged to one another. And they are the last. You already know how this ends. You've known since the very first season of Game of Thrones. Skulls on a wall, each one smaller than the one before it, down to the size of a dog's. So let me show you what those skulls really mean. Because by the end of this video, you'll see that that affectionate nudge is just about the saddest moment in the entire franchise. And the reason has nothing to do with any dynastic struggle or civil war. The Golden Age, the moment between Vermithor and Silverwing, comes at the tail end of the best century dragons ever had. More of them are alive than at any point before or since, nurtured through a 55-year reign under a king who managed to rule without setting most of the realm on fire. Jaehaerys the Conciliator and Alysanne, the Good Queen. He rode Vermithor. She rode Silverwing. And here is the part people skip, because it sounds like set dressing. Those two dragons did not meet when their riders married. They too grew up together. A lifelong bond. When it came time for Vermithor and Silverwing to be bonded to riders, neither dragon was claimed. They were gifted. A dragon's egg was placed in Prince Jaehaerys' cradle in the year 34 AC. 2 years later, the same was done for Princess Alysanne. This simple act would shape the future of the riders and dragons alike. After their tyrannical uncle, Maegor I, usurped the throne, Jaehaerys and Alysanne were left powerless. No patrons, no army, and no future anybody sane would have bet on. All they had were their dragons. Then, in 49 AC, came the moment that ought to be famous and somehow isn't. Jaehaerys and Alysanne wanted to marry, but the people running the realm on their behalf were never going to allow it. It would have needed the blessing of the Queen Regent and the hand of the king. So the two of them climbed onto Vermithor and Silverwing at the Red Keep, flew to Dragonstone, and married there without permission from anyone. The most stable reign in Targaryen history only happened because those two dragons helped 2 teenagers flee from the people who tried to stop them. And for more than 40 years afterwards, that is the royal image the realm learned to look up at. Him flying out to hold an audience on Vermithor, her beside him on Silverwing. When their mother lay dying at Storm's End, they went to her together, on the two of them. They refused the pit. Now the fact that changes everything, and almost nobody knows it. In 56 AC, the Targaryens began moving their dragons into the newly built Dragonpit. Balerion, the Black Dread, the dragon that melted Harrenhal, was one of the first put in. The largest thing that ever flew over Westeros, the animal a continent was conquered from, the last living creature that had seen Valyria before it burned. 3 younger dragons went in behind him. Vermithor and Silverwing did not. They stayed at the Red Keep so they could be close to their riders. And here is why that matters more than any battle in this series. A dragon with enough food and enough freedom never stops growing. Never. That is why Balerion was the size of a small country by the end. Not because he was special, but because he was old and he was free. A dragon that is locked up does not grow. The pit was sensible. It kept the dragons safe and kept them from causing destruction in the realm. But it just happened to be the decision that ended dragons. Not a war, not a plague, just a roof. While the other dragons were held captive, Vermithor and Silverwing were the only dragons in that city kept at the castle with the family instead of in the pit. Free to come and go, close to the people they belonged to, getting as large as a century would make them. Opposites attract. Vermithor and Silverwing were also nothing alike, and this is where it gets strange. You have seen what he is. When the crown finally came for the riderless dragons on Dragonstone, Vermithor burned and ate his way through most of the people who came near him, and the man who eventually got on his back only managed it by walking straight at a dragon that had just killed dozens and offering his own life instead of somebody else's. Silverwing is the opposite, considered the most approachable of the masterless dragons. Of the 4 riderless dragons claimed during the dance, Silverwing is the only one who never killed a single human who tried her. Watch what Ulf actually does there. He runs the wrong way, in the dark, away from the thing that is killing everyone. He blunders into a dragon's chamber, and he steps onto her clutch of eggs. He does nothing brave. He crushes her babies, and then he stands there waiting to die. She sniffs him, she nudges him, she lowers her neck. And now the part that should complicate all of this and instead makes it better. The definitive study of dragons was written by a man called Septon Barth, who was Jaehaerys' own hand. He observed Vermithor and Silverwing up close for years and concluded that dragons are neither male nor female, now one and now the other, as changeable as flame. They paired anyway. Whatever those two are to each other, it was never about biology, and the man best placed in all of history to work it out concluded that the question itself was wrong. The bond unbroken. Alysanne died in 100 AC. Silverwing went back to Dragonstone and made a lair in the smoking caverns of the dragon moat. Jaehaerys lived another 3 years, and when he went, Vermithor took a cavern in the same mountain. Then 26 years of nothing. No riders, no orders, no wars. 2 enormous animals in the dark under an island, while a realm rearranged itself above them. And when they finally come out, on opposite sides of a mountain, claimed by 2 strangers who have never met them, they resume as if nothing ever happened. On campaign, in the middle of a war, with 2 men on their backs who barely know what they are sitting on, there are written records of them coiling around one another during moments of respite, which is precisely what you watched in that scene. 100 years of history, a dynasty rising and cracking apart above them, and their bond remains unbroken. The wall. Which brings us to the only order either of them ever refused. In 58 AC, Alysanne went north on Silverwing, White Harbour, Winterfell, and then up to Castle Black. And then the Queen decided she wanted to see what was on the other side. 3 times she tried to take Silverwing beyond the wall. 3 times the dragon turned south and would not go. Alysanne had been flying that animal for a decade. What she wrote to her husband afterwards was not that she had been frightened. It was that Silverwing had never once refused to take her anywhere, not until the wall. Then Jace asks him what the wall was built to keep out, and Cregan gives him one word: death. The only pair of dragons in recorded history, the only 2 who were never put in the pit, and this was the one instruction they declined. The dragons knew what was up there. The last dragon. And after them, nobody ever writes about a pair of dragons again. There is a war, and there is what comes after the war, and then there is a green female dragon in King's Landing, small, stunted, wings withered, so unremarkable that nobody bothered to record her name. She laid a clutch of 5 eggs. Not one of them hatched. She died young in 153 AC, and history remembers the king who reigned over her death as Aegon the Dragonbane. That was how dragons met their end, and the world seemed to mourn them. The summers got shorter, the winters got longer and crueler. A pyromancer in King's Landing will tell you, generations later, that magic itself started draining from the world the day the last dragon died. 19 skulls on the walls of the throne room. The big ones at the far end, hundreds of years old, jaws you could ride a horse through. And the ones nearest the door, the last ones they managed to hatch, no bigger than a dog's. And when they finally come back, they come back as 3, from a fire. And when they are eventually flown north over that wall, they go without hesitating, because there is nobody left alive, dragon or human, who knew to warn them about what lay on the other side. Now, there is one more thing, and it is the reason I cannot stop thinking about this. Nearly 2.5 centuries after Alysanne stood on top of that wall, Samwell Tarly rides the winch up the same face of ice. and wonders whether Silverwing might have left an egg up there. Nobody has ever gone to look. So the next time that clip comes across your feed, Vermithor coming down out of the sky and putting his head against Silverwing, and everyone in the replies saying she missed him. She did. That part is true, and you were right about it. Just understand what else you are looking at. That is the last dragon family that ever existed, doing the thing that no dragon after them was ever recorded doing again, in a world that is going to spend a century and a half with none of them in it at all. Now tell me two things below. First, do you think they knew what was north of that wall? Or do you think dragons are just animals, and we are all reading a century of poetry into two big lizards keeping warm? And second, the egg. Do you think Sam is right? Is there something up there? I have a second video coming on these two, and it is a darker one, so subscribe if you want it. Because the story of what those two dragons were is only half of it. The other half is what the people holding their reins decided to do with them.